Welcome back to the Reading Series podcast. My name is Kate Sheeran Swed. I am a science fiction and fantasy author, and I am, for the next few weeks, reading 2 chapters a week out of my novella, Outlaw Rising. It is a prequel to my Parse Galaxy space opera series. So let's get started with chapters 3 and 4, and I will check in at the end with news announcements and all that stuff. Let's dive in. And by the way, this is episode 2. So if you missed episode 1, you're going to want to go back and listen to that or watch that so that you can listen to the first 2 chapters. Alternatively, the ebook is free, so you could go and grab that. Links in the show notes. Okay, without further ado, this is chapter 3. Any other day, Sloane would have been thrilled to see Uncle Vin. She'd spent her entire childhood idolizing the man, ditching any and every plan to hang out with him whenever he came around for a holiday or a random flyby. It was never often enough, and her father rolled her eyes until she was sure he'd hurt himself whenever his brother darkened their door, but it was Uncle Vin. She loved him. Today, however, people were already talking about her. Or they would be, once Drew Harkness and everyone else from her class had time to pass the story around about her display at the medical lab, and she didn't think that they would be oohing and awing over her ingenuity. No, she suspected the words spoiled brat might come up more than once. So today she was acutely aware that she was now sitting out in the open at the campus cafe with her outlaw uncle. He was sipping a pink, bubbly cocktail that made Sloane very much regret the fact that she'd ordered tea instead. If anyone recognized Vin, Camden would come down on her like a hammer. She wouldn't have a prayer of staying in school. Vin smiled at her as if he could read her thoughts. "Don't worry, kid, my ID's obscured." For now, Sloane tried to return his smile, but today was getting to her, and it felt forced. "Who are you today?" Vin just sipped his drink and kept on smiling. "Okay," Sloane said, "it's good to see you, Uncle Vin, but why are you here?" He set his drink on the table and rubbed a pair of fingers along his jaw, watching the students pass on the path in front of them. Delivery drones cruised in orderly lines above them, sending occasional glints of light toward the table, their engines thrumming along like hummingbirds. "I need your help on a job," Vin said. It was a good thing Sloane hadn't been drinking when he said that, because she'd have either ended up with a flaring hot tea in her nose or spat out a mouthful on a passing student. "You need my help? Why?" And how? She was pretty sure her father had made it abundantly clear to Uncle Vin that he'd tolerate visits from his outlaw brother, but nothing more. Neither of them had said as much, but Dad had a tendency to insert himself into situations. Every situation. My cat's participating. This is what makes this different than an audiobook. Beethoven, shh. Hey, Dad had a tendency to insert himself in every situation. At least Sloane wasn't alone in that. Vin glanced around, then leaned in a little closer. From a distance, it might have looked like he was making a joke or sharing a bit of gossip. "I can't give you details just yet, but it'd help a lot if you could come." Sloane threw a hand out toward the campus with all its fancy buildings and bulletin boards and students. There were 1,000 reasons why no was an insufficiently emphatic answer, but the campus kinda spoke for itself. "Uncle Vin, I have school." "It's an important job." "Oh, well, in that case." Vin tapped a fingertip on the table. "There's nothing more important than a free galaxy. Nothing." It felt like a non sequitur, but it was Vin, which meant it probably wasn't. "Well, sure," she replied, "so says the outlaw." He raised an eyebrow just a tick. Yeah, she probably shouldn't have said that out loud. That fritzy filter of hers again, ever elusive. There are worlds with strict laws, and worlds with lax laws, and even a few stations and moons in the fringe with no laws at all, Vin said. That's how it should be. The Cosmic Trade Federation keeps trade flowing fairly. And when it's doing its job, the Galactic Fleet protects people in need and arbitrates any differences that turn violent. At the very least, they make sure those battles don't spill out of the relevant systems to affect everyone else. Sloane didn't pay a lot of attention to politics, but that much she knew. "You said when the fleet's doing its job. Is that even a question?" As far as she knew, the Galactic Fleet was made up of a bunch of overstuffed bosses who prided themselves in taking self-righteousness to a whole new level. Vin picked up his drink and toasted her before taking another sip. Smart, Sloane. I've always said that. In actuality, the fleet's a power-hungry blight on the galaxy. They weren't dangerous words, not precisely. The fleet was independent with plenty of oversight. But they weren't 100% safe either. Sloane licked her lips, reaching for a careless attitude. Tell me how you really feel about it. Finn didn't laugh, though his eyes still sparkled with something dangerous. If left unchecked, they'll turn the whole galaxy into their empire. My employer wants to unite the systems against fleet control, but they need evidence, and I've got a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get it. Sloane glanced around, but no one seemed to be paying them any attention. Of course, there could be a button drone listening in from the service module in the center of their table, or the lamppost, or the back of the chair, or anywhere, really. Just because she didn't see it didn't mean it wasn't there. I thought you were a freelancer, she said. What's in it for you? Let's just say the payday's significant. There it was. She wanted to believe in Vin's protestations about freedom and all that, but her uncle was a mercenary first, and always had been. He was a smuggler and a thief, and while the fringe systems might be okay with that, it didn't often allow him to show his face in the center of the galaxy. It was true that the fleet was made up of a bunch of trumped-up stuffed shirts as far as she could tell. Self-righteous at best, meddling at worst. She doubted they meant to take over the galaxy, though. There were thousands of inhabited systems in the Parse galaxy, far too many to allow for true central oversight. Maybe they were overstepping. She wouldn't put it past them to try. But though the center systems tolerated the fleet and the middle systems supposedly adored them, the outer and fringe systems were already leery. They'd fight back, and hard. I'm just going to pause quickly. The Parse galaxy, the way I have it kind of set up, is like in spiraled out rings. So the inner systems in the middle, and then the next round is sort of the middle systems, center systems, middle systems, and the fleet is in the middle system. That's where their home planet is, and their home system. And then you have the outer systems, and then you have the fringe systems on the outside of the galaxy. So if you're watching the video, I just drew a very impressive circle with my hand if you're not watching the video. If you are watching the video, you saw it. I don't want to interrupt it too long, but in case you're wondering, and this all fits together over time, of course, but that's what the Parse galaxy layout is like. Vin was still watching her, waiting for an answer. His expression hadn't changed. She hated to disappoint him, truly, but she couldn't see how her presence would add to any mission, no matter what it was. She also knew that excuse wouldn't be enough either. I don't like the fleet either, Sloane said, but Dad moved mountains to get me into this academy. Big, lava-spewing ones, probably. I can't just take off. Lava-spewing, not lava-splewing. I don't think that's a word. Vin leaned back, studying her. Oh, I doubt that, he said. You don't give yourself enough credit. She gave herself too much credit. That was the problem. Regardless, I'm on thin ice here as it is. I want to help, but I can't. I'm sorry. Vin watched her for another beat, then nodded. He didn't look disappointed, but he didn't have to. She knew he was. All right, kid, he said. I get it. He got up, his drink only half consumed, and offered her a hand. I'll leave you to it. Don't want my rep to blow yours. She wanted to protest that. She wasn't sure her rep could actually get worse. Before she could form the words, though, one of the delivery drones swerved out of its flight path and dropped toward them. She frowned at it, confused. That's weird. It's not... Vin grabbed Sloane's hand and dragged her back, shoving her under the table and shielding her with his body as the spot where they'd been sitting exploded in a ball of fire. Heat rushed across the patio as Vin pulled her to her feet without waiting for the next hit. He was shouting at her, but the world sang a high-pitched tone in her ears that made it impossible to hear what he was saying. But his intention was plain enough. Still holding her hand, he dragged her away from the cafe as more drones broke out of the flight channels as students dropped their black backpacks to flee. The ship, she managed to read his lips as he pulled her toward the hangar bay on the other end of the campus. We need to run. Chapter 4. Vin hadn't wanted to draw attention to the moneymaker by landing the ship in an unauthorized area of the campus, so he'd secured a spot in the school's designated guest hangar. which meant it was now waiting uselessly on the other side of the campus while a swarm of rogue drones chased him and Sloane through a stately line of white-trunked trees. The drone engines whirred with angry determination as bits of the brick path behind him exploded under the laser fire, sending showers of stone spitting up like tiny volcanoes. Those looked like expensive bricks, too, temperature-controlled at the very least. He knew he should have followed his gut and parked in the Academy president's spot, but he'd followed the rules and now it was going to get him killed. Worse, it was going to get his niece killed. Sloane was a half-dozen steps ahead of him, and she'd taken to running in a zigzagging pattern that kept the drones swerving and dodging to try and get in a shot. Smart. Though truth be told, the zips of laser fire were cracking through the pavement at his feet and singeing the bark of the trees at his elbows. Sloane had nothing to do with this, and whoever was operating the drones was well aware of it. "You need to break off," Vin said, shouted really to be heard over the sounds of laser fire and the crashes of regular old mundane drones ramming into each other as the attack drones threw off their usual paths. "They're here for me, not you." If Sloane heard, she didn't give any sign of it. She dashed on, running for all the world like she had a plan. Behind her, a trio of delivery drones spun out of control and then into each other, their spindly legs locking together and making it impossible for them to detach. They fell in one large clump, and Vin barely got out of the way as they bounced, cracking the pavement and spewing bolts, legs crumpling beyond repair. As he glanced back to make sure they weren't going to continue attacking, one of them was sending up a sad orange flag, like a last-ditch call for help, or perhaps a notification of a late delivery. When Sloane reached the end of the tree-lined path, she froze. An open space lay between them and what he assumed was the library, as it was the biggest, stateliest building on campus with stone steps and stained glass windows. It even had a bell tower. But it was much too far away to do them any good. It was all well and good to zigzag between trees, but as soon as they left the shelter of the trees, the drones would have them. Even now they were circling, forcing Vin to keep moving. He'd have expected them to blow up a few trunks by now just to get to him, but they were moving strangely, jerking around in odd rotations, as if they were looking for him, visually. Couldn't they read his heat signatures? Vin darted in beside Sloane, hooked an arm through her elbow, and wrenched her toward the left side of the path. They backtracked through the trees while the drones spun around, spitting and whirring as they changed course to follow. "They're too slow," he said. "Something's controlling them." "Of course someone's controlling them," Sloane said, breathing hard, and the fringe of her hair... Okay, I'm going to start that again. Sloane was breathing hard, and the fringe of her hair across her forehead was damp with sweat. What else would it be? "Computer programs run delivery drones," he said, and if his attackers had an AI running these, he suspected he'd already be dead, along with half those trees, so why didn't they? Is there somewhere we can hole up?" She nodded, gulping in air. "Lecture hall, on your 7 o'clock. She pointed forward and to the left. "Beethoven, you're very distracting." "I would pick him up to show you, but he will run away and scratch me, so I'm not going to do that. I don't want to make him sad either." Okay, she nodded, gulping in air. "Lecture hall, on your 7 o'clock. She pointed forward and to the left. "That would be 11 o'clock, kid." He let go of her arm and gave her a push, using his free hand to draw his own laser weapon. He hadn't wanted to grab it with innocent bystanders around, but the students had all cleared out of the area and the emergency teams hadn't arrived yet, which, by the way, was a cause for concern. He intended to ping a strongly worded message to the Academy president about that, assuming he survived. For now, if he could get a shot in, he might take these jerks down before they could do any real damage. He nodded toward the building she'd indicated. "Let's go." Sloane ran for the lecture hall, and Vin did everything in his power to keep his body directly behind hers, to shield her from any possible incoming fire. He twisted as he ran, squeezing off a pair of shots that hit the closest drones mid-center. The drones didn't even pause. He couldn't tell if it was shielded or if it was just really damn strong. Either way, his weapons were useless against it. He had half a mind to call Hilda to ask her to get the moneymaker in the air with cannons charged. But there was nowhere to land here, not without backtracking to the field, and he figured he should probably leave some of the campus intact. With a last glance behind her, Sloane darted sideways and out of the trees, across a brick-paved path, and straight up to a pair of glass doors. Glass. Not exactly the fortress he'd hoped for, but there wasn't much of an option. Sloane slammed her palm against the sec box, using her ID to gain entrance. Vin dashed after her, and the door slammed shut. Seconds later, the drones crashed into the door behind them and bounced back. One of them opened fire, red-orange streaks cracking through the air and into the glass, which repelled them. The shots simply bounced away, leaving the black-coated drones to hover uselessly outside. Vin whistled. That's some glass. Sloane was breathing hard, cheeks flushed. She set a hand on the wall for support. This place works on some expensive project, she said. Gotta protect 'em. And in the minds that worked on them, he hoped. And the minds that worked on them, he hoped. It's not better than an audiobook, y'all. Okay, sorry. I'm learning here. Sloane beckoned him back and through another door, where the solemn quiet of the lecture hall closed in around him. It was a surprisingly comforting... Ooh, I found a typo. It was a surprisingly comforting... You didn't know you were going to be finding typos with me, did you? Okay. It was surprisingly comforting. Or rather, he felt surprised to be comforted by it. The seats were cornflower blue, the carpets more of a midnight color. It smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and freshly cut wood, though he couldn't say why that would be. Vin peered around the frame of the door, where the drones were still waiting. They hovered outside more like angry butterflies than bees. Angry, biting butterflies. This is good for now, he said, but we need an escape plan. Hilda could land the moneymaker outside, but the drones would attack us if we ran. If there's a roof exit, that could fool them, or a back door. Do you know if there's a back door? Sloane didn't answer. He wouldn't blame her if she had collapsed from shock or started weeping in fear, or if she'd simply run away, leaving him to deal with the deadly situation he'd brought down on her. But when Vin turned to see where she'd gone, she was just sitting in one of the blue seats at the end of the aisle, body curled over her flip tab. She didn't even look worried or scared. She might have been scrolling through the feed for an update on the weather. What are you doing? He asked. Calling a campus escort. Vin blinked. He'd never been to college, but that sounded more like something you'd order in an upscale center system club after a few too many drinks, not something to save you from impending death by drone. What is a campus escort? Sloane rolled her eyes. Clearly a man. No. I mean, yes, I'm a man, but I didn't go to school, so I never used an escort? Not this kind, anyway. Probably. Sloane held up her tab. A campus escort walks you home in the dark. Walks you home in the dark, like if you're hanging out at a friend's place and you don't have anyone to walk back with. Sometimes I go for late-night swims at the gym, and the campus shuttles don't run right by my building, so I call the campus escort. Vin almost asked what she'd need protection from, but the words died on his tongue. He bristled, ready to bring his ship cannons down on anyone that dared. What would Xander say if he knew his daughter was attending a school where that kind of precaution was necessary? I can't believe your campus is so unsafe that they'd need that, he said. He had half a mind to speak with the dean himself. Sloane just shrugged. It's safe, but it only takes one villain. She looked pointedly toward the door. Focus, Uncle Vin. They can get us out of here. Vin couldn't help picturing a pair of do-gooder Z-ballers with wide shoulders showing up in uniforms made of reflective gear, maybe goggles, too. He glanced back out the door where the drones were steadily firing their lasers at the glass. They might run out of energy before they got through, or they might not. It was hard to say. Sloane, he said, I'm sure the campus escorts are great. Excellent, even. But I don't think they'll be enough to protect us from these guys. He didn't even know who these guys were, or who'd sent them. It seemed clumsy for the fleet, especially with the obvious manual control. But if the fleet wasn't after him because of his mission to reveal their true intentions, then who was? It wasn't as if he had a dearth of enemies. This could be completely unrelated to the fleet data. It could be one of the baby cartels he'd stolen from. They tended to function with a combination of recklessness and arrogance that made it easy to get under their skin, or even that casino back in the Torrent system, where he'd skimmed off the tables for a total profit of 5 million galactic tokens. That had been months ago, though it had gotten a bit personal when he'd stolen the manager's toupee. Sloane tapped the light on the flip tab, then flicked her wrist to close the device. Trust me. The campus escort will get us out of here. Tell your pilot to land on the grass in front of the library. The escort will do the rest. Vin sighed and opened a comm link to Hilda. It wasn't as if he had any other options. At the very least, he'd be able to get Sloane out of here. He was trying to pull his thoughts together along with a real escape plan when a pair of orange-painted drones zoomed into the room and stationed themselves at the doorway. They had fat bodies and 4 arms each, the propellers protected by thick metal rings. He'd been picturing a human escort, though of course a pair of drones would work just as well, better even. If not for that paint job, they'd look nearly identical to the attack drones. At least he'd been right about the reflective safety gear. Sloane popped out of her chair and strode over to the drones. To the library, please. One of the drones scanned her and then, at her command, scanned Vin as well. Your safety is our duty. The voice that trumpeted out of the drone was stern enough to rival a fleet officer, stiff and vaguely self-righteous. Great, Vin thought, but can you handle a swarm of military-grade attack drones? The escorts led the way into the hall, flanking Vin and Sloane when they followed. The attackers were still working on the doors, and their lasers had left a spiderweb of cracks in the glass. What was that stuff made of that it had held out this long, and where could he get some? As one, the escort drones turned red. Flashing lights activated on the top of the fat bodies, reminding Vin painfully of a speed patrol vehicle. Threat identified, the stern voices said. Stay confined. Confined, Vin said. We've been confined. We can't wait for it, Sloane said. But he couldn't, because everything happened at once. The attacker's fire cracked through the glass with a sudden dramatic flash. The shards lit with red light as they scattered directly toward him. At the same time, the escort drones unleashed their own attack. It happened too quickly to duck or cower. 1 second, Vin was staring into a rainstorm of oncoming glass. The next, he was staring at the deluge through a thick, translucent window. It was like looking at an explosion through a thin cloud. The broken glass simply struck the window and fell, the accompanying lasers pinging helplessly against it. Vin glanced at Sloane, who was smirking, and then he looked up. The foggy window extended around them on all sides. There was a thick, foggy ceiling above his head, and when he looked down, he could see that it had somehow enclosed his feet, too. He hadn't even felt it. Are we in a bubble? Sloane grinned, clearly proud of herself. Yup. I can just picture her. That's why I'm laughing. These people live in your head, you know. That wasn't humiliating, not at all. Of course there wasn't anyone to see them, and it was better to get out alive in a bubble than to breathe your last in a blaze of overrated laser fire, but still, a bubble? Your safety is our duty, the drone voice repeated. Stay confined. And then the bubble began to move. Sloane was already walking, and Vin had to trip to keep up. It was like walking on a treadmill, only surrounded by a thick, impenetrable wall of... Again, he had no idea what the material was, but he would very much like to. The minute he stopped feeling like a rodent in an exercise wheel, he'd look into it. They should make the doors out of this stuff, he said. Not as pretty, I guess. The drones escorted the bubble straight through the gauntlet of attackers, which soared after them in what seemed to Vin like a bewildered flock. If drones could look bewildered. A few of them held their fire. They'd either run out of power or were saving it, but the rest lobbed a constant streak of ineffectual blasts at the shield. To no avail. The Academy really did make an effort to protect its students. It was impressive, honestly. These things had to be expensive. He hoped the drones and their accompanying bubble wouldn't go up in flames because of him. The escorts led them straight down the tree-lined path where they'd run from the attackers in the first place, and the aftermath of the fight made him cringe. Shattered delivery drones were strewn about, casualties of the rogue drones' reckless flying. The pavement was cracked and broken, though the bubble rolled over the hazards with ease. Most of the trees were still intact. One of them now looked like a badly broken bone, as it had been cut in half straight down the middle of the trunk, and a fire-extinguishing bot was dealing with another that was engulfed in flames. Before, the campus had smelled like grass and sunshine. Now it smelled like char and destruction. He shouldn't have come. Moneymaker waited at the end of the path where Hilda had set her down right in the middle of the field. She looked junky and out of place among the stately buildings, but Vin had never loved her more. Potential threat identified, the escort said. Stay confined. The ship is where we're going, Sloane said. You can drop us off there. The escort didn't even hesitate. It is our duty to remind you of the student handbook, section 43, article 7, it said. Students are advised not to accept rides from strangers, which includes, but is not limited to, spaceships or pods, hovtiles, hovbikes, and scooters. Official academy taxis are available at all hours and can be identified by the school seal on the side. Students should always confirm the identity of a taxi by checking the vehicle's override, Sloane said, and Vin tried not to be concerned by the fact that she seemed to know exactly how to skip this particular reminder. You can drop us off at the ship. Please confirm that you wish to waive your right to protection aboard this vessel. Vin would have sworn he heard a half sneer in the word vessel. It had to be his imagination. And relieve the Academy of any liability in the event of your injury or death. And there it was, protecting the brightest minds and the Academy's ass. Waived, Sloane said. Confirmed. The drones glided forward, stopped when they reached the end of the Moneymaker's gangplank. Sloane flashed a smile, and Vin was going to ask why when the drone snapped a photo. Success recorded and logged. Have a safe evening. And with that, the drone zoomed off. Vin tugged Sloane deeper into the ship to protect her from the inevitable rain of laser fire, though the gangplank was already lifting, and the ship had begun taking off. Sweet, sweet safety, and for now, at least for now. Vin could have kissed the ship, and maybe Hilda too, though she'd probably box his head if he tried. Sloane sat down in a crate, bracing herself as Moneymaker rose and tilted away toward the atmosphere. That was fun. Thanks for visiting. Vin sighed, wishing he could expel all his fear for his niece in one big, loud breath. He sat down next to her. We'll drop you off at a transfer station in the next couple of hours after the excitement dies down. Once I'm gone, you'll be safe. Sloane looked at her hands for a long moment. He'd have expected her to be shaking or scared, but she wasn't. She was a little out of breath, sure, and her cheeks were still spotted with color, but she'd handled the situation with impressive resourcefulness. He wanted to say so, but he didn't want her to think he was pushing. I'll help you out, she said. Vin blinked, surprised. That wasn't at all what he'd expected her to say. Really? She shrugged, but there was a spark in her eyes that he recognized all too well. She'd sounded sarcastic when she said that it was fun, but, Xander was going to kill him. You're in danger, she said simply. Besides, it seems like maybe you're onto something. Like someone doesn't want you to finish your mission. Just one question, though. He owed her that, even if she asked why he'd turned to a life of crime after growing up in a well-off family on Elter, or if she asked how much he stood to make if he retrieved the data key. He might believe in the cause, but he was still a mercenary, and she knew it. Anything. Why me? He smiled, then gave her a shoulder nudge with hers. You fit the dress, kid. Come on, let's go tell Hilda that where we're headed. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the reading. I'm obviously still learning, still kind of having fun, but I don't know, I kind of like leaving in those little mistakes. I have edited some out, I promise. It might not seem like that, but I really have. Quick reminder, Outlaw Rising ebook is actually free on all of the retailer platforms. So if you want to get ahead in the book or if you want to read along with me, you can go and grab that. I will put a link down in the show notes to that. And I will also put a link to the Q&A form, so if you have any questions for our live event on March 17th, and I have figured out that I should be able to do that on YouTube and Instagram simultaneously. So if you have any questions, drop those in the show notes as well. And finally, please subscribe to the channel, whether you're listening on a podcast or on YouTube. That really helps me out. I am having a really fun time reading these, and I hope that if this is your first introduction to the Parse Galaxy, I think you'll, like, it's such a joy to write them because I get to kind of think of all these weird, funny ways for Sloane to get out of these situations. She's the main character in the main series, and I'm not going to spoil her how that happens, but yeah, it's just the escort drones. That's the kind of way that she kind of gets out of a lot of her situations, and she kind of has this, wild ideas take her off and sometimes work out and sometimes don't, and I don't know, it's just kind of wacky and fun to write and silly, and I enjoy writing that a lot. And I just wanted to add one more thing that I forgot that I wanted to say, which is that I am going to also be doing an author's note update each week on YouTube. That's going to be going out on Mondays. I will link to the latest episode. That was probably the first episode in the show notes here. And if you're listening on a podcast provider and you want me to put those out on Apple Podcasts or something like that, let me know. Send me an email. It's kate@katesheeranswed.com. And I will consider doing that. But for right now, it's just a playlist on YouTube. They're going to be like 10 to 15 minutes. Me kind of, I don't know, talking about what I'm working on, maybe what I love about the story world that I'm in at the moment, or some of my goals for the week. And I'm also going to talk about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what I'm thinking about it. I tend to kind of pass on positive feelings about shows and books and things like that, but gentle critique possibly. So that's what's going on in the YouTube channel world. Again, if you're listening on a podcast and you really want that there, please let me know, and join me next week when I read chapters 5 and 6 out of Outlaw Rising. Have a great week.